Welcome to Spotlight. I'm Rian Keating. Today we're at the Helen Hayes Theater where Torch Song Trilogy is now in its third year, and we're delighted to have the opportunity to interview Jonathan Hadary, who's currently starring as Arnold. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you. My pleasure.
This was the first time I had seen it this week, so I was naturally very curious what the audience was composed of and what their reaction would be. And it seems a lot of people knew what lines were coming up, and they laughed almost before you had uttered them.
Really?
Do you find that people come back again and again?
People do come back again and again. I haven't been aware of a response like that yet, like you get when you go to a Marx Brothers movie in New York City. People sometimes are more willing to laugh early on at lots of things that are funny than other audiences are. Sometimes people just won't give in early on. I haven't noticed people laughing ahead of the laughs. That's a kick, though. If they're getting off on the writing, hearing things coming down the road, that's fine with me.
How would you describe the audience reaction, this being a gay play, quote unquote?
The audiences don't seem usually to be gay or straight, if that's what you mean. I mean, in terms of the overall response, the response varies night to night enormously. There are plenty. Sometimes audiences will not make a peep all night long, and then they'll cheer at.
Welcome to Spotlight. I'm Rian Keating. Today we're at the Helen Hayes Theater where Torch Song Trilogy is now in its third year, and we're delighted to have the opportunity to interview the star of that show, Jonathan Hadary. Jonathan, welcome. This is a pleasure.
Thank you. Welcome to the theater.
I had first seen this show this week because I'm a little slow at getting around to things, and I was very curious when I came to see what the audience would be composed of and how they would react to the show. It seemed to me that they seemed to be right on top of the lines and seemed to know what was coming from the very beginning.
It's interesting. Audiences night to night vary enormously, and with this show, in my experience with it, they've tended to include people of all sexes, all sexual inclinations, all ages, Manhattan people, bridge and tunnel people, people from all boroughs of the city, and for that matter, in other states, where I did the show in California. The common denominator, I'd say, is that they all had mothers. And the play gets to that, and I think that's the basis of their response. It always varies. The equation is always comes out roughly within the same realm, but how it gets there by the end of the evening, it can change enormously from night to night. There are nights that will not laugh at anything, and then they'll cheer at the end, and there are nights that will go crazy all night long and be very tepid with applaud. You have to pay no attention to it in a way to do the show, because whether they're wonderful or not, you still got to do the whole play. It's very easy to get into How's the House. They're clappers, they're not laughers. They're laughers, they're not clappers, and it doesn't help really.
But do you find if they're not as responsive that it has an effect on your performance?
Well, sometimes. I mean, if they don't laugh, then I don't wait for them to, so I'll talk quicker than I would otherwise. It's nice to have them laughing. It's a comedy, and it has room for them in it, and their sound is very much, by the end of the evening, just becomes like the wind or like any natural sound. It's something you become used to. It's nice when it's there early on in the evening, too.
Because this is considered a quote-unquote gay play, do you find that people come in with preconceived ideas about it? For example, the Wednesday matinee ladies, when you were doing matinees.
Actually, when I was doing matinees, the matinee ladies were wonderful. They were much more open to it, even though they didn't know what they were getting into, or even if they did know what they were getting into, they were much more open to what they did get into than men generally are. Men have I think men that are brought by their wives to the show. The first act, it's like, come on. But the play holds them. Arnold hopefully holds them. And then I think they forget it. It's a real triumph, because somewhere along the line, they stop resisting. Something ultimately pulls them in, and they stop being skeptics, and they realize it's about them too. Hopefully. That's what seems to happen. That's what seems to be the achievement that the play has really...
Do you find that that skepticism disappearing at a certain point, or...
No, it's interesting. A friend of mine once came to the show, and she had seen it once and didn't get off on it, and then she thought it was whatever. She had all sorts of criticism, but she just was standing back from it, and I said, where did it change? What point? She didn't know. She didn't know. I used to feel I like by the end of the first act to have the audience responding as one, if possible. Sometimes there'll be, a group of people that are getting little gay jokes that other people don't get, and sometimes there will be a little group of people just laughing at a certain point of view that the play. By the end of the first act, it's nice to have them all operating as one. I don't always pull that off, but that's what I'm trying to do. What was the question?
Matinee ladies.
See, I don't know. Matinee ladies. They love it. See, they're in it. Mrs. Beckoff is, they sit and they wait for 2 hours, and then they're represented on the stage in a more direct way than Arnold represents.
Do you find that Mrs. Beckoff is a character, because she's really almost a caricature? She feeds fuel to the fire about Freud's theory that aggressive women do breed gay sons.
No, I don't find that. She's all the characters in the play dance perilously close to pitfalls, like the pitfall of the classic Jewish mother or the pitfall of the standard drag queen or whatever. Mostly they avoid them and become something more than a Jewish mother or a good-looking hustler kid or something. So but the actors bring that to it. The writing brings it to it. The writing dances around it. No, I think that's what I like about it, in fact, is that it doesn't... It's vaguer than some of those theories are. It's vague is not the word I mean. It's more enigmatic. It's more of a puzzle. It's not quite clear. It's not a black and white case at all about who's right. And Arnold's, pretty messed up in an awful lot of ways. It's not all, he doesn't have all the aces.
Well, his maturity is something that we don't really see on stage or the process of his maturity, I should say, because it's done over a span of time, and each act is a different period of time. How do you mature him, so to speak, during intermissions? Do you just press a button? Or
mostly the play takes care of it. A friend of mine asked me once, he said he'd seen the show, and he said, how do you turn on a dime? How do you go from laughing, wisecracking one line and crying the next? And I said, the play does, and that's what Arnold does, and the writing has you hear one line and hear the next. 6 years elapsed between the beginning of the play and the end of the play. First time I did the play, it felt like 6 years had elapsed to me, just because I'd never been on stage as long in my life. Now it's simply a matter of, I alter my appearance in some ways. I'm a mess more by the end of the evening, without having to work at it terribly hard, than I am at the beginning of the evening, which contribute to some sense of being older, time passing. 6 years isn't an enormous time difference in the life of an adult. It's not like the difference between an infant and a 6-year-old. But Arnold changes. They're less perceptible on the surface, the changes in Arnold, I think, that take place during the course of the play. They have to do with responsibility and taking responsibility as an adult, I think. And they're not things that manifest themselves real clearly physically.
As a performer, which of the 3 acts give you the most fulfillment? Do you have a preference?
I don't know. It varies also. It varies. I know, back to audience response, people seem to all have a favorite act, and it never seems to be the same one. They all have one favorite and disagree with other people that prefer another. The first act, when the first act has a wild house, when people are getting off on it from early on, the first act feels wonderful. It's so theatrical. It also involves direct contact with the audience. I'm a character, but I'm talking to them, these people sitting here in these seats. I can't see very well, but they're not supposed to know that. That's just because of the lights in my eyes. In a way, it's the most exciting. The third act, on the other hand, sweeps me up. I can be in whatever frame of mind or whatever mood, and all of a sudden these scenes come along and the fights come along, and I'm simply in them. I don't think about them or where I am. And that's very exciting. And the passions are, way higher. Mind you, I don't hate the second act by any means. Some nights I prefer the second. It varies an awful lot. As I said before about the response varying from night to night. So correspondingly, my preferences vary.
You've done the play on the West Coast, too. How would you describe the difference between the L.A. audiences and the New York audiences?
The L.A. audiences were newer to it when I was there, and consequently more eager to see it, had more of an idea of what it was about, and it was a new new hit, so it had all that, first flush of success about it, which was fine with me. It was great. It made for wonderful houses. Perhaps more uniformly than any show tends to have when it's been running a long time. Mm-hmm. There are, nights when the audience just isn't having a ball. They don't ever think that. Audiences generally think they're in wonderful audiences.
Well, that's very interesting. How do you prepare for Arnold when you come to the theater? Is there an emotional process that you go through, or you just...
No, I used to, when I was first doing it, I have an hour of makeup. It used to be 2 hours. And I remember saying to myself then I had to learn how to get ready for the show while I was getting ready for the show. Like, do both at once. Mm-hmm. Figure out a way to paint an eyebrow on and get ready emotionally at the same time. I don't know if I figured it out, but finally what happened is I learned to do the makeup without having to think about it so much, and you learn to do the play without having to spend so much time getting... I used to wake up in the morning and count the hours until I had to be at the theater, because it was this enormous thing looming ahead of me every night. After a lot of performances go by, I became used to what the experience was. And, the first time I took a vacation, I came back from the vacation and I got ready and I went out and the house lights go down and I go out in the blackout and I sit down and I take my place and Lady Blue, Susan Edwards upstairs, starts to sing, and I started crying. And it was just like I didn't have to think about it, and that suits where Arnold is at that point in the play, right at the top. Well, an awful lot of points in the play, I suppose. But I didn't have to do anything. It's almost like you put me on the stage, and now that's what I do. I do Arnold. I start to move differently. I start to talk differently. It's bizarre. But it comes from long run. It comes from that in particular, I think.
But isn't there the danger of making the performance not as energetic, right?
Yes.
How do you work around that?
Well, you have to keep an eye on yourself and keep listening. And I've done a bunch of long runs. It's an odd thing an odd credit, but it's true. I know lots of people have been in 50 things in the time I will have been in one. And I learned from doing them how to do them. Sometimes it's just a matter of literally throwing myself off. I'll stick a prop in my right hand instead of my left hand, just because then a whole chain of little events will be thrown off. It's easier to get stuck in the first act of this play, because I'm in space. Mm-hmm. For me, like the third act, there's dishes, there's glassware, there's silverware, there are people that I'm in the same room with. It's a naturalistic setting by then. It's much easier to stay rooted. Tea does what it wants to do, whatever you may want it to do. It goes where it goes, and so it spills, and there's always things constantly to engage me that are indeed spontaneous things. The whole notion of spontaneity and doing the play over and over again anyway is such a bizarre thing, even if you only do it 30 times instead of 300. You never did it tonight. It's a sort of existential way of looking at it, but it's true. And it was first impressed on me when I first did a long run 12, 15 years ago.
You took a year auditioning for this play.
Over.
What were your first impressions when you, as an audience member, saw it?
When I first saw the play, I had already auditioned once. I got called the day of the audition to come in at this point when they were moving to Broadway and they were looking for a matinee Arnold. And I read from left field, intelligently I think, but it didn't have much bearing on what they were looking for because I hadn't seen the play. When I saw the play, I had by then heard about it. I was out of town when it opened on Broadway. I was flabbergasted. I said, yep, I got to play this. You bet. An awful lot of things appealed to me about it. The thing that probably impressed me most about the play was that Harvey wrote it for himself, but with the sense to know that if it was going to have a life, it was going to have a life after him. And it's so well written that someone else can play it. Mm-hmm. I wrote a one-man show once for myself, and it was terribly written, and no one else could have done it, and no one else did, and I haven't. This is, it's a rare thing, I think, to find in someone who's a performer and writer, to be able to stand outside enough to see it without them in the role. And Harvey was amazing to watch, amazing. And then when I finally got the role, I saw him a lot, and which worried me at first, but he's Harvey. I was able to get a lot and not get screwed up by watching someone else. Instead, it was helpful because I couldn't do what he did anyway. So I sort of saw where he went, in directions he went, and it was like a road map. But not I didn't have to follow it. exactly. I could take my own detours here and there.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure it's probably the hardest physical role that you've done.
I guess not. It's not a terribly physical role. It's physical in that it's long. I keep talking all night long, and it's not strenuous physically. Although the day after my first performance, I felt as if I had run a marathon. I felt physically battered, and I sit for all of Act 1. I roll around the bed for all of Act 2. I don't walk across the stage until Act 3. But maintaining the energy. I guess I tend to burn off. I could eat pretty much whatever I want. Mm-hmm. Pretty much. And still stay in some sort of reasonable shape. Because of the show.
How are you able to disconnect Arnold after the curtain comes down? Have you found that's a problem, or?
No, early on, I didn't find it late. I would find it during the day. I would find when the role was nothing but mystery to me. I didn't know. I didn't have it all pinned down. It was all brand new to me and so enormous that there was no time even. I didn't know where I was. If someone didn't throw me a cue, I wouldn't have any idea what was coming next. I just sort of got on at the beginning and got off at the end. And what was the question?
How you disconnect Arnold?
Oh yeah, it used to overtake me during the day. At that point, I would sit and I would just suddenly think how I was going to be feeling 6 hours down the road that night, or a particular moment, a line, and I would go into it. Not anymore much. I still do sometimes, but not much. A couple beers and I go. I mean, I'm up for a long time after the show. I'm not exhausted. I'm basically exhilarated after the show.
I guess when you're closely identified with a character, such as Arnold, there's a lot of people assume that that's what you're like off stage. How are you able to hold that kind of crowd at an arm's length? Have you found that a problem?
I had a crowd to hold at arm's length. People recognize me here and there, which is nice. Usually they're very, very nice, because they spent an evening with Arnold, and that's what they're responding to. And I always say at the end of the evening they're cheering for Arnold as much as anything, because they shouldn't be able to make much of a distinction between me and Arnold. And they're cheering for Arnold, I accept. I'm like the medium through which the character is presented nightly. I'm there. What was the question?
Well, let's see. How you're able to hold your crowd at
yeah, well, as I say, it isn't really an enormous problem. The role, I think, awes people a lot, too. I think there are roles that attract people, groupies and things like that, and this, for me, doesn't seem to be one. In my experience trading stories with other Arnolds, it hasn't been either. I think people assume I must go to sleep immediately also. That's usually what people say, And it's late also, so they're not likely to stay as late as they would have after another show for an earlier curtain.
Do you feel the relationship between Arnold and Ed is honestly represented? Because there's one wonderful scene that you have on the telephone, which reminds me of Louise Rayner and the Great Ziegfeld.
Oh, I never thought of that. Yeah, she won an Oscar, didn't she? Yeah,
she certainly did. It seems all relationships end over the telephone, but
well, it's a very there's a scene right off the bat that's basically what the scene is about. Is nothing that's foreign to anybody that's ever been involved with anybody, whether they're straight or gay or a man or a woman or whatever. And that's early on. It's like the second scene of the play. It's a fabulous scene. Everyone's been through scenes like that in one way or another. And it's like Arnold's calling Ed to say, tell me it's over. Is what he thinks he wants to hear, but it's the last thing he wants to hear. And everybody goes back and forth. It's a rough scene. In a lot of ways, the play starts there. The monologue is like an overture.
Right.
I spend an hour getting dressed, and I go up and I do this monologue, and then that's all gone. I change my makeup again, and I go out and I do the phone scene. And the play, it's like 4 plays from my point of view, rather than 3. And the second one starts really there.
Well, there's another scene in the first act with a backroom bar, and one thing I'm curious, because of all the media attention that AIDS has gotten, have you found that the audience reaction to that scene has changed?
It probably hasn't changed inexorably, but it's changed. I don't know if inexorably is what I mean. Permanently is what I mean. When AIDS is in the headlines, last summer when there was a lot of hype about it, those nights, I mean, the news, changes so quickly. I did a show once a satire about a mass murderer. John Lennon was killed during it, and Reagan was shot during the run of the show. And at both of those times, the play suddenly became not funny. It was a satire and hilarious. 2 days would pass, 3 days would pass, a week would pass, and people were willing to laugh again. 4th of July, I was up there in the scene miming being sodomized, I suppose is the most discreet way to put it, in a backroom bar.
Say what you like.
It felt un-American. It felt like nobody was laughing. You know what I mean? I felt like, man, what do these people think? It's a shocking scene. It's intended to be shocking. It has a real serious point to it that pays off the shock value of it. It's not there to shock you, but that's okay, because the point is being made. It's not in favor of such encounters, per se. It's like Arnold learns something from it. And there's a wisecrack at the end of it that often people don't laugh at. Sometimes they're perfectly willing to laugh, and sometimes it's just too close to the bone to be funny. But the news items are fleeting. When they come back again, then they're back again, and they're in the news, and then people respond like that.
Well, I suppose there's no way to get around that.
No, there isn't, and there's no way to know what's going to happen. The news is it's the news. Whatever happens, happens, and sometimes it affects you, and sometimes it will have no bearing on you.
What do you see after leaving Torch Song for yourself?
Oh, I don't know. I'm at a point where I'm trying to figure it out exactly. I'm interested in going out and checking out California. Again, doing the show there was really my first exposure to California, or me to it, it to me. I'd like to go back. I'm not sure exactly. I've been doing this a long time. I'd love to get into another show. On the other hand, I think like right now, I've had it with doing shows. Once I say I'm not going to do this anymore, I've certainly, in a real concentrated way, been performing on stage for the last year. And I would certainly love to do something real different, either a different medium, get in front of a camera, a musical, someone happy, or something different, something, not nothing. Although nothing would be fine for a while too.
Well, I'm sure you'll need a break after this. Well, you had grown up in Evanstown, excuse me.
It's all right.
And started with the piano and clarinet. When did your interest in acting come about?
In Evanston, they had, it's suburban Chicago, they had a very well-endowed schools, and creative dramatics was begun in 4th grade as part of the curriculum, and I was in plays there, and, straight through. And then the Evanston Children's Theater had put on big, full productions on proscenium sets, big old-fashioned shows where the adults were played by students from Northwestern and the children were played by children from the public schools. I played a dwarf in Snow White. I played Hans Brinker in 7th grade. The outlet was there. The opportunity to be performing was there, and I always liked it up there. All the schools all had auditoriums with stage lights and curtains and the whole bit, so I had some sense of being in the light in front of people when I was a little kid. First performance here, my first performance in the bar scene, in the back room scene. I got up there, and in the middle of everything else, I had like a deja vu to being a kid in school and being up in the light for the first time and thinking like, I like it here. This is okay with me. They're all out there and they're watching me and the lights are on. And
you had gone to college for a while, but you had never finished. Do you think when you aspire to the performing arts that a 4-year curriculum is that necessary in terms of having a degree? Or
no one's asked me for a degree. I think it's a good idea to finish if you start. I don't think it's a terrible idea not to if you don't. That's what I did. Twice I didn't. I'm a junior. No one's asked for a degree. I think if I were to go back and finish it, it would just be to sort of satisfy myself and perhaps my parents. Although it's not a pressing issue by any means at this point.
You had done a show called Pushing 30, which was at Circle Rep, if I'm not mistaken.
You're not mistaken.
And it's something you had written yourself. Is that a road you'd like to take?
I did a club act for a while, and then I took the material that I've been doing in the club act and sort of theatricalized it. I had a ball doing that. It's one of the things I get to do in this show. I like talking to an audience directly. And in a club, that's what it's about. I remember when I had musical arrangements together. I had some tunes lined up, and I had no idea what I was going to say, but I knew I'd say something. And I got up and I started ad-libbing and talking, and people would laugh, and I had a great time, and it was usually the best part of what I did was the stuff I didn't plan. I thought about it a lot since I've been doing this show, and feel I don't have the energy. I haven't been singing in a year. I make so much sound all night long. I play every now and then, but I don't sing much, and that was the basis of the act, was
the music.
Songs, me singing, playing piano. I'd like to do it again. A lot of writing projects interest me, but performing, hosting, that sort of thing, I like. A good time doing it.
Do you find that more of a challenge than doing a play where you're not protected by written lines?
In a way,
you have to rely
in
on
a way, I didn't
spontaneity.
protect myself well enough in that show with lines and with a structure that was real secure. I did that anyway. I jumped in and I suffered the consequences only and learned a lot from it. One of the reviews, at least one of the reviews, said something to that effect, that stick him in a play where someone else has figured out what he should do. Don't let this man run wild by himself. I like both. I love, in an act, it's yours. You can do anything you want. Do anything you want, and they're in your room, and that's the whole idea. It's a luxury. It's a luxury, and it's a lack of the kind of strictures that sometimes it's too free. If you don't sort of narrow it down for yourself, you can just you can do anything you want, and that's heady, and you won't get anywhere necessarily.
Do you find comedy harder to do than drama? Or do you think it takes a good dramatic background to do comedy?
I think it's the same. I don't know. I think they're the same. I think it's acting. I think laughs have a lot to do simply with knowing that people might laugh. I don't know. I've always been able to get laughs. That's not a problem. Sometimes it's a problem, actually. It is a problem. That laughs will be expendable for the sake of the seriousness of a moment sometimes, and sometimes they shouldn't be. You can argue. Point by point, you can argue. Who is it? I don't know. Somebody said, dying is easy, comedy is hard. It is hard. It is hard. You have to not worry about whether they laugh or not. That's when they laugh the most.
How do you approach Torch Song? From a comedic point of view, or?
No, just from being Arnold. Arnold's someone who says funny things. I want people to laugh, especially early on. But it's built in such a way that I, as Arnold, want people to laugh. And if they don't, I can deal with that. That makes me want them to laugh all the more. It's a real actable objective to get them to like me, the character.
You've certainly changed a lot of attitudes with your performance, and
well, good, I think.
I want to thank you for taking time today.
Oh, pleasure. It's nice to talk.
This is Rian Keating, and you've been watching Spotlight. Our guest today has been Jonathan Hadary from Torch Song Trilogy. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can write to myself in care of Perot Productions, 640 10th Avenue, New York, 10036.